From the highway, the Prairie Star Travel Mart looked warm and normal, the kind of place you trust without thinking. But behind it, an 8-year-old boy was literally freezing. For 16 months, Mason Reed had been living under the control of a guardian who played the hero in public and ruled like a jailer behind closed doors. In the next 12 minutes, Hank Atlas Monroe, would have to keep that kid awake long enough for an ambulance to get there. What happened before sunrise would expose a quiet countdown already circled on a calendar. And it would draw 180 members of the Hells Angels into a town that had trained itself to look the other way. This is Mason's story and mine. And the ending is a reminder that sometimes the softest mercy arrives wrapped in the loudest leather. If you believe invisible kids deserve to be noticed, hit subscribe. Drop a comment that says, "I see you," and tell me where you're watching from. The more people who pay attention, the fewer Masons end up freezing behind dumpsters. Now let me tell you how one stopped bike changed everything. "Please don't send me back," he whispered. "He'll smile, and they'll believe him." Mason Reed was 8 years old, standing pale under the parking lot lights, looking smaller than a kid should ever look. His lips had that bruised purple color that makes your stomach drop before your brain catches up. I'd stopped at the Prairie Star Travel Mart just outside Sundown Junction, North Dakota, for gas and coffee, nothing else. The neon sign promised hot food 24/7, like proof the world was still decent if you needed it to be. But behind the building, the wind tore through the alley like a blade. I heard it before I saw it. A faint tapping. Tap, tap, pause, like someone knocking on plastic with a weak hand. I followed the sound around the corner, and that's when I saw what the shadows were hiding. A small body was wedged tight against the base of a dumpster. Cardboard hung over him like a blanket that had given up. Snow was packed into the folds of a hoodie that was way too thin for the night. His shoes didn't even match. One sneaker was missing its lace. The other had a split sole that opened up when he tried to move. His sweatpants were soaked from the knees down, and when his fingers slipped out for a second, they were white at the tips and darkening toward the knuckles. I crouched low, making myself smaller so I wouldn't scare him. "Hey, kid," I said, keeping my voice calm on purpose. "Look at me. Can you hear me?" His eyes cracked open, dark brown, unfocused. He tried to talk, but the cold chewed his words into pieces before they could get out. I put 2 fingers to his neck. The pulse was there, but it was slow and fading. I didn't need a thermometer to know exactly what I was looking at. I shrugged off my riding jacket and used it to block the wind, then slid one arm under his shoulders and the other under his knees. He weighed almost nothing. That was the moment my brain stopped thinking about gas prices and road miles and narrowed down to one word only: heat. "Stay with me," I told him. "Give me 60 seconds. That's all I need." I carried him to the front doors. The bell chimed 3 bright, cheerful notes that felt wrong for what was happening. Ding, ding, ding. Warm air washed over Mason's face, and I felt his shiver spike, sharp and desperate, like a last protest from his body. Inside, the travel mart smelled like burnt coffee, fryer grease, and wet winter boots. The cashier, a guy in a beanie who looked half asleep, glanced up, then saw Mason's color and snapped fully awake. "Call 911, I said, steady. "Tell them it's a child with hypothermia." He hesitated, his eyes flicking down to the patch on my vest. I can't." "You can," I said, not raising my voice. "Certain. And you will." He grabbed the phone. I set Mason down on the bench by the space heater and wrapped a silver emergency blanket around him. He tucked his hands under his arms like he was trying to keep his own heat from leaking out. His lips moved again. "Please don't call him," he whispered. "He'll come." "Who?" I asked. "My uncle," he said. "Caleb." That's when I noticed how his eyes kept drifting toward the front window, like he expected headlights to appear the second that name was spoken. "Okay," I told him. "We're not calling him. We're calling help." His voice broke into a tiny, exhausted confession. "I tried," he whispered. "Tried what?" I asked, leaning closer. "I asked people." The words came out in short bursts, like each one cost him energy he didn't have. First was a lady at the pump. She rolled her window down just a little and asked, "Where's your coat?" Like that was the whole problem. Then she drove away. He took a shallow breath. A truck driver said he didn't want trouble. Said, "Kid, I got my own stuff." Another breath. A security guy told me to leave the property. Said if I stayed, he'd call the cops on me. His eyes closed for a full second. I felt my own heart start pounding harder. "And the last one," he whispered, "was a man with a charity hat. He told me to pray. Said the county has rules and I need to go through the right steps." His mouth trembled. Then he bought coffee and looked at me like I was trying to steal it. I didn't say anything. Anything I could have said would have been either too small or too angry. Instead, I watched his fingers twitch toward his chest. I followed the movement and saw a tiny brass compass on a frayed cord. The glass was scratched. The needle stuck and wobbled like it couldn't find north. On the back, 2 initials were carved rough and uneven, J+L. He touched it twice, like he was checking that something from his old life was still real. "What's that?" I asked softly. "My mom," he whispered. "She gave it to me." I tucked that away because the way he touched it wasn't like a toy. It was proof. Outside, the wind slammed into the windows in hard bursts. Inside, the clock above the lotto machine ticked louder than it should have. I watched his eyes droop and kept my voice gentle but firm. "Eyes on me," I said. "You can rest later. Right now, you listen." The EMTs got there fast, 6 minutes, maybe 7. The older one, a woman with gray hair tucked under her cap, slid a thermometer under Mason's tongue and then let out a slow breath. 99, she said. "We're right on the edge. If he drops under 90, his heart can decide it's done. We need to start active warming now." That's when I understood something important. The countdown had already started. This wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was medical and very real. The EMTs lifted Mason onto the stretcher with slow, careful hands, especially around his fingers and toes. His eyes locked onto my face, wide and panicked, like he thought letting go meant disappearing. I put my big hand on the stretcher rail and leaned in close. "I'm right here," I told him. "You keep breathing. I don't move. Deal?" His eyelids fluttered, and he gave me the smallest nod just before the ambulance doors closed. I turned and caught the cashier staring, pale as the floor tiles. "Did you see him earlier?" I asked. His throat bobbed when he swallowed. "He was by the pumps," he admitted. I thought he was with someone." I didn't argue with him. I didn't shame him either. But I didn't forget. Because later he'd be one of the guilty witnesses, the kind who never meant to fail a child but did anyway. I rode behind the ambulance through blowing snow all the way to St. Bridget Medical Center in Grand Forks. In the ER bay, the air smelled like disinfectant and warm plastic, and the machines beeped steady and patient, like they were counting time for us. Dr. Priya Anand listened to the EMT report, checked Mason's weight, studied the bruises and his skin color. I watched her face change, from concern to certainty. "This isn't one bad decision," she said quietly. "This is a pattern." They cut away Mason's wet clothes. I turned my head, but I still saw enough. Ribs that showed too clearly. A fading ring-shaped bruise around his wrist. Frost-nipped toes that made Dr. Anand press her lips flat. Out in the hallway, she faced me. "You got him here with minutes to spare," she said. "Another 10 or 15, and we'd be talking organ damage. You understand that?" I nodded, my throat tight. "How do I keep him safe?" "For now," she said. "You make sure no one walks out of this hospital with him without a court order." I stepped into a quiet alcove, pulled out my phone, and called the one person who could turn a single biker into a wall of witnesses. The line picked up on the second ring. "Deacon, it's Atlas. I need every brother within 200 miles at St. Bridget Medical Center." Now, there was a pause. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the squeak of a cart somewhere down the hall. "What's going on?" 8-year-old boy, found freezing behind a dumpster. He's terrified of his guardian. "We're not waiting for paperwork to move slower than the cold." "Say no more," he said. "We're coming." I ended the call and stared at my screen like it had changed the world, because it had. Mason woke briefly after the first round of warming. His eyes were clearer, but his body still shook in small, constant tremors. A nurse adjusted his blankets and asked softly, "Do you have family we can call, honey?" Mason's eyes snapped to the door. "They'll call him," he whispered. That was the moment. Dr. Anand would later testify, when she knew we had to move faster than normal. Chalk arrived before dawn because Chalk always did. That was his road name and it fit. Retired school counselor. Kind eyes. A voice that felt like a soft place to land. He sat beside Mason without interrogating him. Just pointed gently at the compass. "Who gave you that?" Chalk asked. Mason tightened his fingers around it. "My mom," he whispered. "She said if I'm lost, I go toward the lights." He swallowed. "Sometimes north doesn't work, so I just hold it." I looked at the carved initials and felt something twist in my chest. 2 parents gone. 2 letters left behind. By 3 in the morning, motorcycles started arriving in quiet, controlled lines. Engines low, then off. No show, just response. Men carried blankets, hand warmers, and a box of new kids' socks still sealed in plastic. Badge came with them. Retired detective, neat gray mustache, eyes that missed nothing. Stitch showed up too, former Navy corpsman and EMT, already talking with nurses about frostbite care and follow-up referrals. Circuit arrived last, young and sharp, already holding an evidence bag and a small notebook. Deacon met me in the hallway. He didn't ask for the story first. He asked about the kid. Then he asked for the plan. "Keep it clean," he said. "Evidence. Procedures. No hero moves." I nodded. "That's what I want." You might be picturing 180 members of the Hell's Angels rolling in ready to break something. That's not what filled that hospital. What filled it was discipline. Presence with purpose. Deacon laid it out like a checklist. Badge would handle law enforcement contact. Circuit would document and preserve. Stitch would coordinate medical follow-up. Chalk would stay with the boy. Deacon would deal with the public side if it came to that. I heard the wording and understood. This wasn't about going after someone. This was about making sure the system couldn't fail Mason again. Mason's truth came out in layers, the way trauma always does. First came the small truth, the one that almost sounded normal if you weren't listening right. "I sleep in the garage," he whispered, staring at the ceiling. "In the little laundry room. The door locks from the outside." Then the deeper truth that made Dr. Anand stop writing. "He locks the cabinets," Mason said, "with a real lock. If I take food, he says I'm stealing." Then the system truth, paperwork used like a weapon. "He took me out of school," Mason whispered, "said I was homeschooled. He made papers. People signed." I felt the anger rise, hot and fast, and forced it back down. Anger without strategy is just noise. "What school?" Chalk asked gently. "Maple Ridge," Mason said. "Mrs. Feldman. She asked about my lunch. I said I wasn't hungry. Uncle Caleb brought donuts the next day. Everyone laughed. Then she stopped asking. A teacher who noticed then let charm smooth it over. Another rung on the failure ladder. And there was a lady from the county," Mason added, eyes shining. "She came once. Uncle talked to her outside. He smiled. After, he told me if I said anything, I'd sleep in the snow." Kim Alvarez's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Do you remember her name?" she asked. Mason shook his head. "She wore a badge on a lanyard," he whispered. "Like school." The fourth layer was the hardest to say because saying it made it real. "He said after New Year's," Mason whispered, his voice cracking. "He wouldn't have to feed a kid anymore. He said the money clears." "What money?" Dr. Anand asked. Mason hesitated, then said, "My mom and dad had money when they died." The whole story snapped into focus in one sharp, awful line. Mason's parents had been killed 16 months earlier in a highway pileup near Devil's Lake. A settlement and life insurance payout followed, hundreds of thousands meant to last him into adulthood. The guardian controlled it. And somewhere along the way, that guardian decided Mason was temporary. Mason reached under his blanket and pulled out a cheap prepaid flip phone with a cracked screen. "I hid it," he said. "I recorded him." The room went quiet in that specific way, like everyone heard the same invisible door click shut. Circuit didn't touch the phone yet. He asked for gloves. He asked the social worker to witness. He asked Badge to log the time. Because later, when Caleb tried to say, "That's not my voice," Circuit wanted the court to have nowhere to hide. At 4:46 a.m., Kim Alvarez walked into the room. The social worker came in with her hair pulled back tight and that tired look you only get from seeing too many cases that should have been stopped before they ever started. She listened first to Dr. Anand, then turned her attention to Mason. He kept glancing toward the door, like he expected it to open at any second. Chalk leaned closer to him and spoke so softly I almost missed it. "Be brave for 2 minutes," he murmured. "Just 2. Let her write it down. Then you can rest." 2 minutes. Another countdown. This one wasn't medical. This one was emotional. Kim started typing. "Emergency protective hold," she said quietly. 72 hours while we verify. 72 hours can be a lifetime. Or it can be a crack a predator slips through if no one's watching. That's when a nurse leaned into the hallway and said the sentence that made every man in leather shift his weight. "Someone is here asking for him." I turned. At the far end of the corridor stood a tall man with neatly combed hair, a clean jacket, and work boots that looked barely worn. His smile was ready, polished, practiced, friendly enough to lower guards. He held a paper bag like he'd brought breakfast and concern. "Caleb Rohr. I'm Mason's uncle," he called out, voice warm enough to melt suspicion. "I heard he got scared and ran off. I'm here to take my boy home." Mason's hands started shaking so hard the blankets rustled. Chalk quietly angled his chair, blocking Mason's view of the hallway. "Eyes here," he whispered. "Breathe with me." Badge stepped forward, not aggressive, just professional. He spoke first to hospital security, then to the deputy who'd just arrived. He used words like minor medical instability and suspected neglect, because those words open doors that anger never will. Deacon addressed Caleb without heat. "You can speak with the deputy and the social worker," he said. "You are not taking that child out of this hospital." Caleb's smile didn't drop. It sharpened. "Now hold on," he said with a light chuckle. "He's been sensitive since his parents passed. He dramatizes, wanders. I've been doing my best." I watched the performance and finally understood Mason's whisper from earlier. "He'll smile and they'll believe him." Dr. Anand stepped out and met Caleb's eyes head-on. "Sir, he is not being discharged," she said. "And the county is being notified." For the first time, something real flickered across Caleb's face. Irritation, quick and cold, before the mask slid back into place. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Do what you have to do. I love my nephew. I just don't want these misunderstandings getting out of hand." Mason's fingers clamped around his compass like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Kim Alvarez held up the printed paperwork. "This protective hold is active," she told the deputy. "He stays." The deputy nodded, then turned to Caleb. "Sir, where does the child sleep?" Caleb spread his hands. "He has a room. We're renovating." "What room?" the deputy asked. Caleb hesitated just a fraction too long. "In the garage," he said. "It's fine. It's heated." Stitch, standing nearby, didn't say a word. He just glanced at Dr. Anand's notes, then back at Caleb. His silence did all the talking. Sometimes the strongest moment isn't a punch. It's a pause where the lie doesn't land. Caleb tried once more. "This is getting blown out of proportion. He's a kid. He gets scared. He makes things sound worse than they are." Mason's voice came from behind the door. Small, steady, aimed straight at me like a lifeline. "He circled the date," Mason whispered. "He said, after the ball drops." I felt Deacon's hand settle on my shoulder, heavy and calm. "We heard you," he murmured, "and you're not going back. If you believe a child's fear should count as evidence, Comment I believe kids and subscribe, because when the sun came up, Badge and I were heading to County Road 12 with daylight, warrants, and a recording sealed in an evidence bag. And what waited behind that garage door would prove Mason wasn't the first. Before sunrise, the hospital parking lot filled with a sound that didn't belong to winter. At first it was a low rumble out on the access road, so distant it felt like thunder trapped under snow clouds. Then headlights appeared. Then rows of them. Motorcycles rolled in with disciplined spacing, tires crunching over salt and slush. The sound swelled, steady and synchronized, until it pressed against the hospital walls. Then, almost as one, the engines shut off. The silence afterward was complete. I could hear the automatic doors sigh open, a nurse's shoes squeak on tile, and the steady beep, beep, beep of a monitor somewhere behind glass. By 5:10 a.m., 180 members of the Hells Angels stood in that lot. Not a rally, not a show, a perimeter of witnesses. Men stood beside their bikes in loose formation, hands in pockets, shoulders squared against the wind. A few carried practical things, socks, blankets, bottled water, hand warmers. Nurses coming on shift slowed, bracing for the story they'd been taught to expect. But the story didn't go that way. Deacon gathered the chapter officers, 23 men who knew the difference between anger and action, and led them into the small hospital chapel. It smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked around the room. "We keep this boy safe," he said. "We do it clean. We do it legal. We don't give anyone an excuse to hand him back." All in favor? For a moment, nothing moved. Just the tick of the wall clock and the soft hiss of a vent. Then hands went up. Every single one. 23 men voting unanimously to protect a child they'd met only hours earlier. Badge walked out with me, Circuit already slipping into procedure mode. "We need paper," Badge said. "Not feelings. Paper." Sheriff Lyle Keenan met us in a cramped office off the ER. The kind that always smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. He glanced at the patches, then at Dr. Anand's notes, then at the sealed evidence bag in Circuit's hand. "I'm not looking for trouble," Keenan said. "Neither are we," Badge replied. "We're looking for the truth while the kid's still alive." Kim slid a form across the desk. "Protective hold is active," she said. "But he has guardianship. He'll push hard. We need an emergency custody order and a search warrant." Circuit kept his voice flat. "We have a recording, medical documentation, and the child's statement." Dr. Anand didn't soften her conclusion. "This isn't a runaway," she said. "This is neglect with exposure injury and chronic malnutrition," Dr. Anand said, steady and clear. Sheriff Lyle Keenan let out one slow breath. "Get me the affidavit," he said. "I'll wake the on-call judge." That's when it hit me. The real enemy here wasn't Caleb Rohr's temper or his smile. It was time. Every minute the system moved at its normal pace gave Caleb another minute to rewrite the story. At 5:42 a.m., Circuit duplicated the audio in a secured room, hospital security standing by as witnesses. He time-stamped it and logged the chain of custody. No drama, just precision. Because later, Caleb would say it was edited, planted, or stolen, and Circuit wasn't leaving that door open. At 6:07 a.m., Judge Marlene Oakes appeared on a video call, glasses low on her nose as she read the affidavit. "The child remains in protective custody," she ruled. "No guardian contact. Warrant granted for the residence, limited to evidence of confinement, neglect, and financial exploitation tied to guardianship accounts. Paper. The kind that keeps kids from disappearing." Mason woke a few minutes later, eyes clearer but still glassy with exhaustion. Chalk was there instantly, voice settling over him like a blanket. "You're doing good," he told him. "Your body's warming up. You're safe." Mason's fingers slid under the blanket and found the compass. He tapped the scratched glass twice. The needle trembled and stuck. "He'll say I lie," Mason whispered. I leaned in close. "Then we use facts," I told him. "Facts don't care about smiles." Mason swallowed. "He hums," he said quietly, "when he's mad." That small, ordinary detail told me exactly who we were dealing with. By 7:03 a.m., the search team was set. Sheriff Keenan, Deputy Rena Holt, a county family services investigator named Tessa Brandt, and Badge as a civilian consultant. Keenan wanted eyes that wouldn't miss anything. I rode along as the reporting party, the first adult Mason had trusted. Deacon kept the brothers at the hospital, rotating in pairs near the entrances. No blocking doors, no arguments, just quiet presence. Witnesses don't get brushed aside. We rolled out under a pewter sky, tires hissing on wet asphalt. We passed Maple Ridge Elementary. Dark, quiet, and I wondered how many mornings Mason had walked in hungry and still said, "Yes, ma'am," like politeness might protect him. What I didn't know then was how much that school had helped make him invisible. At 7:28 a.m., we pulled up to 611 County Road 12, a ranch house, detached garage, long driveway edged with snow drifts. From the outside it looked normal, ordinary. Deputy Holt knocked. The door opened to warmth and the smell of butter. Caleb Rohr stood there in flannel pajama pants, spatula in hand. A small radio played old country from the kitchen. He looked freshly groomed, like he'd been waiting to be seen. His smile came easy. "Morning," he said. "What's all this?" Keenan held up the warrant. "Caleb Rohr, we're executing a search warrant and serving an emergency custody order. You are not to contact Mason Reed." Caleb's smile wavered, then snapped back into place. "Misunderstanding," he said with a soft chuckle. "That boy panics. He runs. I've been doing my best." "Step back," Holt ordered. They moved through the house methodically. Body cams blinking red, gloves on, photos taken, notes logged. In the kitchen, the pantry door had a padlock. The refrigerator handles were looped with a chain and combination lock. Caleb tried to laugh it off. "He sneaks food," he said. "Kids, right?" Badge didn't even look up. "He's 8, he said. "He's not running a black market." In the hallway, they found the garage door deadbolt from the outside. Beyond it was a narrow laundry room. A thin cot, a plastic bucket with a lid, and a space heater unplugged from the wall. The window had been screwed shut. I stared at that cot and felt something cold settle under my ribs. This wasn't poverty. This was design. Then Badge spotted the calendar in the master bedroom. December and January were marked in heavy red ink. January 3rd was circled 3 times with a note beside it. "After court, funds clean." Other notes crowded the margins like instructions. "No school questions." "Storm window." "Doc call." Caleb's mask slipped. "You can't use scribbles as proof," he snapped. Keenan turned, voice flat. "You want to explain the locked food?" he asked. Caleb's jaw tightened. "You don't understand," he said, sharper now. "I'm the one raising him." Tessa Brandt opened a desk drawer and froze. "Sheriff," she said quietly, "there's trust paperwork here." A folder labeled Mason Legal held bank statements. The trust had started at $314,000. Over 16 months, $228,000 had drained out through management fees, cash withdrawals, and purchases in Caleb's name. A 2025 Polaris snowmobile, a lake cabin deposit, recurring charges from a Fargo casino. Numbers turned Mason's fear into evidence. But the bottom of the folder was worse. Badge pulled out another packet, older, labeled Tyler Markham, a foster placement from 3 years earlier. The death certificate read accidental exposure, found after a winter storm. A life insurance policy for $50,000 had paid out. Beneficiary, Caleb Rohr. My stomach dropped. This wasn't one child. It was a pattern. Keenan stared at the papers. "Why do you have a policy on a foster kid?" he asked. Caleb's eyes flicked once. "Burial costs," he said too fast. "People do that." "Stop talking," Deputy Holt said. Then the last rung of the failure ladder showed itself. Tessa checked Caleb's laptop, still logged in. Like he never imagined anyone would look. An email thread titled Homeschool Approval was open. A district administrator had written, "ROK's donation covered the new scoreboard. Mark compliant and close the attendance flag." Another message from a family services supervisor read, "We can't keep reopening cases on a community volunteer without hard proof." Hard proof, Badge said quietly, photographing the screen. Like a child freezing behind a dumpster? "This goes to the state," he added. "Not just the county." By 8:03 a.m. Sheriff Keenan had seen enough. He turned to Caleb. "Caleb Rohr," Sheriff Keenan said, voice steady. "You are under arrest for felony child neglect, endangering the welfare of a child, unlawful imprisonment, and misappropriation of fiduciary property. Additional charges are pending." Deputy Holt guided Caleb's hands behind his back. The cuffs closed with a clean click, controlled, professional. Keenan read him his rights right there on the porch while a small radio inside kept playing soft, cheerful music, like the house didn't know what it had done. As they walked him to the cruiser, Caleb looked at me and tried to bring his smile back one last time. "He'll come back," he said. "He always does." I didn't answer. Mason wasn't in a locked laundry room anymore. He was in a hospital bed with a compass under his blanket, a social worker at his side, and 180 witnesses outside who had quietly decided that always was over. By late morning, the guilty witnesses started to crack. One by one, each confession laid another brick in the wall closing around Caleb. First came Evan Clean, 26, the Prairie Star cashier who'd lived in Sundown Junction his whole life. He'd seen scams, drifters, and winter travelers who didn't want help. When he saw Mason by the pumps, he told himself the easiest lie there is: someone else will handle it. His hands shook when he spoke. "I saw him," Evan admitted. "His lips were wrong, and I thought if I call it wrong, I'll get in trouble. So I didn't call." He swallowed and couldn't look at me. "I knew something was wrong," he whispered. "I just didn't want to make it worse." Next was Janice Garrison, 59, the nearest neighbor on County Road 12. She'd lived there 14 years. She'd heard crying once, muffled through snow. She'd seen Mason hauling heavy bags to the garage in thin gloves. She'd noticed the same clothes week after week, and how Mason flinched when Caleb's truck door slammed. "I called 3 months ago," she confessed, her voice breaking. "They came." He smiled. "They left." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "He told me if I kept meddling, he'd make sure the sheriff knew I was trespassing." She shook her head. "I stopped calling because I thought, if the county saw it and did nothing, what was my voice going to change?" Then Lori Feldman, 47, Mason's third-grade teacher at Maple Ridge, sat down with her hands folded like she was holding herself together. She talked about the empty lunchbox, the bruise at the wrist, the way Mason watched other kids eat like he was memorizing food. "I filed a report," she said, tears spilling. "But the principal told me Caleb was a volunteer, a donor." He said, "Don't turn this into a circus." Her voice cracked on the word vanished. Then Mason disappeared into homeschool paperwork. I told myself the system would catch it. Didn't. By noon, Circuit was at the sheriff's office imaging Caleb's laptop while Keenan requested the Tyler Markham file from archives. In a back room, a clerk's face changed when she saw the request. "That file was closed fast," she murmured. "Too fast." Badge didn't push. He just waited, letting the silence do its work. Because that was the pattern in this whole story, everyone waiting for someone else to do the hard thing. Now the hard thing had names, dates, recordings, locks, dollar amounts, and Caleb Rohr's smile didn't stand a chance against paper. That first night, Mason slept in a real bed again. He kept his fist clenched around the little brass compass until his knuckles went white. Nurse Haley tried twice to ease it from his hand to check his fingers, but Mason's eyes snapped open every time, wild, pleading, like letting go would make the world slide backward. So Chalk found another way. He took a strip of gauze, looped it gently through the cord, and tied the compass to the bed rail where Mason could see it without gripping it. Then he lowered his voice, almost like a lullaby. "It's still here," Chalk said. "And you're still here. That's the whole point." Mason blinked, breathing shallow. His eyes drifted to the hallway, then back. I sat in the chair by the window and didn't pretend I wasn't tired. My gloves were still damp from the ride. My shoulders still carried the weight of that alley behind the travel mart. I stayed anyway because Mason had looked at me first, and that mattered. Over the next 48 hours, the story turned into paperwork. Not because anyone wanted it cold and clinical, but because paperwork is the language the system understands. Kim Alvarez filed the emergency petition for continued custody, attaching Dr. Anand's findings. Acute hypothermia, early frostbite, signs consistent with chronic malnutrition, and an injury pattern that didn't match normal childhood clumsiness. Stitch talked with nurses about rewarming protocols and long-term care, making sure the discharge notes didn't soften anything. He knew how a sloppy sentence could be twisted later. Circuit built a clean, boring timeline, dates, times, locations, logs, because boring evidence wins cases. And Badge, in his calm, retired detective voice, made sure Sheriff Keenan's team asked the right questions in the right order, so the case wouldn't collapse under technical mistakes. From the county jail, Caleb tried to claw control back immediately. He demanded a phone call to check on his nephew. He complained about harassment, about public humiliation. He claimed the Hells Angels were intimidating staff. Deacon never raised his voice. He met with hospital administration, showed them the custody order, and offered a written agreement. Brothers would stay off property unless asked. Anyone on site would follow security instructions. No exceptions. Presence without pressure. Support without spectacle. It disarmed the fear people expected to feel, and it kept Mason from becoming a headline instead of a child. At the first court hearing, Judge Marlene Oakes looked down over her glasses and asked one simple question. Where was the child sleeping? Sheriff Keenan described the locked laundry room in the garage, the chained refrigerator, the padlocked pantry. The judge's face barely changed, but her voice did. No contact, she ordered. Immediate restraining order. Guardian privileges suspended. Temporary custody remains with family services pending kinship placement. That's how it was said in court, plain, formal, heavy with meaning. Caleb's attorney tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. A grieving child acting out. A family situation blown out of proportion. Then Circuit submitted the audio through proper channels. The courtroom went quiet and listened. They heard Caleb's voice, calm, ordinary, talking about money like it was a weather report, talking about timing like it was a plan. There was a moment, maybe 2 seconds, when it finally reached him that his smile wasn't going to save him this time. Judge Marlene Oakes set bail at $500,000 cash only. High enough to make sure he didn't stroll back into town by dinner. Then she added conditions. Surrender passports, no contact with witnesses, no access to any accounts tied to the trust. Paper became protection. While all that moved forward, Mason's world shifted from crisis into recovery, and recovery takes its own kind of courage. Dr. Anand explained frostbite care in words an 8-year-old could handle. Your fingers are angry, she told him gently. We're going to help them calm down. Chalk helped him eat slowly, because after long hunger, your body needs patience as much as food. Stitch taught him a breathing game for when nightmares hit. 5 breaths, he'd say. I count with you. In 2, 3. 2, 3. I watched Mason learn something new, that safe adults don't disappear the moment you need them. On day 3, Kim Alvarez found Mason's aunt. Her name was Samantha Reed Calder. She lived in a small blue house on Walnut Avenue in Grand Forks. Close enough to reach the hospital in 10 minutes. Far enough that she hadn't seen what was happening behind that garage door. She walked into Mason's room with her winter coat still on, cheeks red from the cold, eyes wide with the kind of regret that hits like a wave. Oh, baby, she whispered, then stopped herself, like she wasn't sure she'd earned the right to say it. Mason studied her for a long moment. His fingers touched the compass on the bed rail twice. Aunt Sam? He asked, his voice thin. She nodded fast, tears already falling. I'm here, she said. I'm here now. He didn't run into her arms like in the movies. Trust doesn't work that fast. But he reached out one hand and let her hold just his fingertips, careful around the tender skin. That was his version of yes. The kinship placement took more forms, home checks, and interviews. Badge insisted on every step, not because he doubted Samantha, but because Caleb had been approved too easily once before. This time, nothing was going to slide through. On discharge day, Samantha showed up with a new coat, new boots, and a backpack filled with things kids should never have to beg for. A hoodie that fit, thick socks, paperback about space, and a small stuffed dog with a red bandana. Mason traced the dog's stitched smile like he was testing whether it might vanish. The club didn't hand Samantha an envelope in a hallway. They did it the right way. Deacon set up the North Star Safe Kids Fund through a local nonprofit partner. Receipts, transparency, oversight. Chapters from 3 states donated quietly that first week. Within 10 days, the fund held $62,400 earmarked for Mason. Therapy, winter clothes, tutoring, and a legal retainer so Samantha wouldn't drown in motions and delays. I didn't tell Mason the number at first. I told him what mattered more. You won't have to earn being safe, I said. Safety isn't a reward. Before he left the hospital, he asked one question in a voice barely louder than a breath. Is he coming? Chalk didn't sugarcoat it. He's in jail, he said. And there are rules now. Strong rules. Mason's shoulders dropped just a little, like his body finally believed the floor would hold. The trial moved faster than Caleb expected, because the evidence was clean and the paper trail was loud. Circuit's forensic report tied trust withdrawals directly to Caleb's accounts. School emails confirmed the attendance flag had been closed after donations. Photos of the locked pantry and garage made misunderstandings sound ridiculous. And the Tyler Markham folder, the second child, turned the case from cruelty into pattern. The state reopened Tyler's death review. No gore, no headlines, just a quiet, thorough audit that asked the questions no one had asked 3 winters earlier. The medical examiner who'd signed off too fast was investigated for misconduct. A family services supervisor resigned under pressure. It wasn't vengeance. It was accountability. On the stand, the guilty witnesses finally said the words that had been chasing them. Evan Clean, the cashier, voice shaking. I saw him. I didn't call. I'm sorry. Janice Garrison, the neighbor, wiping her face. I convinced myself the county knew better than me. Lori Feldman, the teacher, barely able to speak. I believed the wrong adult. Their confessions didn't erase what happened, but they built a bridge to what came next. A town admitting it had learned the wrong habit. Looking away. On the 5th day of trial, the jury deliberated for 1 hour and 21 minutes. When they returned, the courtroom stood. The foreperson's voice didn't wobble. Guilty. On all counts. Caleb stared straight ahead like he was listening to a different room. At sentencing, Judge Oakes listed the charges plainly. Felony child neglect, unlawful imprisonment, theft by deception, misappropriation of fiduciary property, and insurance fraud tied to the prior case. Then she said the sentence that made Samantha grip the pew. 17 years in state prison. No parole eligibility for 10 years. Restitution ordered. Permanent termination of guardianship rights. Standing no contact order for the duration of release. Caleb's smile never came back after that. Justice finally had a timestamp, but justice wasn't the ending. It was the beginning. 3 months later, Mason stood in Samantha's kitchen wearing socks without holes and a hoodie that fit his shoulders. The house smelled like cinnamon oatmeal and clean laundry. Simple things, but to Mason they felt like proof. He still woke some nights, heart racing, sure he'd hear a lock click. When that happened, Samantha sat on the floor beside his bed and listened without rushing him. Chalk had taught her that. Stitch had reinforced it. I'd modeled it by staying. And the compass? Circuit took it to a watch repair shop run by an old veteran who didn't ask questions. He just fixed what mattered. When the compass came back, the needle moved smooth and steady. No sticking. Found north like it had been waiting all along. Mason turned it over in his hands for a long time. Then he did something he'd never done before. He smiled. 6 months after the night behind the dumpster, Mason returned to the Prairie Star Travel Mart. Not to relive it, but to rewrite it. I parked my bike in the same spot as before, but the air felt different this time. It didn't feel like a trap anymore. The bell over the door still rang out. Ding, 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 bright and ordinary, like nothing bad had ever happened here. Evan Clean stood behind the counter in a new uniform shirt. There was a patch on it now that read Child Safety Trained. The Travel Mart had added a heated alcove by the entrance and a sign in plain, honest language. If you need help, ask. No questions first. Evan came around the counter slowly, careful, respectful. "Hey, Mason," he said, his voice thick. "I'm really glad you're here." Mason lifted his repaired compass. The needle sat steady, sure of itself. "I'm not lost," he said. Evan nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "No," he said, "you're not." That same month, Maple Ridge Elementary changed its rules. No homeschool approval without a private interview with the child. No paperwork without a documented home visit. The district partnered with family services for unannounced check-ins. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Reports didn't disappear into closed flags anymore. The North Star Safe Kids Fund grew too bigger than Mason. In its first year, it raised $14,800 and paid for therapy and winter gear for 14 at-risk kids across 2 counties. Not because bikers swooped in to save the day, but because the community finally stopped pretending someone else would handle it. On Mason's 9th birthday, the clubhouse didn't throw a loud party. We kept it simple because Mason liked simple. A chocolate-frosted cake sat on the table with a small plastic compass on top, pointing north. A line of brothers in leather stood back and waited until Mason stepped forward first. I handed him a small framed photo Samantha had found tucked away in a box. His parents at a lake, laughing, sunlight on their faces. Beneath it, written neatly, were the same initials carved into the old compass cord. J+L. Mason stared at it, his throat working. "They loved you before you could remember," I told him. "And that love still counts." He took a breath and looked around, at Deacon, at Chalk, at Stitch, at Circuit, at Badge. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. "Thank you for not leaving," he said. "And if you're listening to this thinking the story is about bikers, patches, or loud engines, it's not. It's about a child who did an adult thing. He walked toward the lights when everything in him said the world wouldn't care. It's about how easy it is for decent people to choose comfort over responsibility. A window rolled up. A door closed, a report filed and forgotten. And it's about what happens when someone decides to do the hard thing the right way. Not with fists, with presence. With paper. With patience. With proof. You don't need 180 motorcycles to change a child's life. You need to notice. You need to ask the second question. You need to call again when the first call goes nowhere. If you've ever felt invisible, hear this clearly. Invisible is not the same as unworthy. Mason wasn't invisible because he didn't matter. He was invisible because people got used to looking away. So don't get used to it. If a kid hesitates before answering a simple question, pay attention. If a story sounds too polished, ask for the messy details. If someone smiles too easily while a child goes quiet, trust your instincts and follow up. If the story hit you in the chest, don't just feel it. Do something with it. Subscribe if you believe children shouldn't have to earn safety. Comment "look away" and tell me who saw you when you felt invisible, or who you wish had looked. Share this with someone who works with kids, teaches, or just needs a reminder that noticing is not optional. Because somewhere right now, another Mason is standing by a gas pump with purple lips, waiting for someone to do the second hardest thing in the world. The hardest thing is being that kid. The second hardest is stopping your comfortable life to help. Be the person who stops. Don't look away.